Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I am Syed Akbar Hussain, and welcome to the ADR Initiative 7th webinar in our Alliance series, Bridging the Distance in Dispute Resolution to Peace. Today, it is my pleasure and honor to introduce the man himself, Mr. Rahim Shamji, CEO of ADR-ODR International, Master Mediator and Trainer all over the world. Rahim has been mediating since 2005 and has a wide civil commercial practice where he has undertaken over 500 cases in that time. He regularly undertakes complex, multidisciplinary, and multi-party cases. His approach towards his mediations is always with a strong sense of neutrality and confidentiality to ensure that he can gain the party's trust and confidence in the process. As the CEO of ADR-ODR International, Rahim has expanded the realm of ADR to countries that couldn't dream about ADR before he came in, such as Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Northern and Southern Africa, and many other places where it is desperately needed. He has been training peace builders everywhere, and we hope he never runs out of the infinite reserves of energy he has to make all this happen. So Rahim, welcome.
Thank you very much, Akbar.
So today we're going to talk about the past, present, and future of ADR, the ADR Initiative and ADR-ODR International. So Rahim, the basics first. Why ADR? And why ADR-ODR International? How did it all begin?
It's an interesting question. And it began in my journey when I was about 2013, 2014, when I started doing some travel for work. And I realized that there was a need to have an organization that was not exporting a model, but a model that was cross-cultural, that was fit for purpose in different jurisdictions, and that people took time to really understand the local nuances. And by 2015, 2016, it was clear that I wanted to do this. And so in 2016, I set up ADR-ODR International Limited. And from within that, we created a network of people that would help us be global, but local. And now we have 33, 34 countries where we're represented, including Pakistan.
That is awesome. So, after having started ADR-ODR International, can you tell us what your organization is working on at present, and what does the future look like for ADR?
The future has always been bright. The future has always been one where you can see that mediation, arbitration, consensual forms of dispute resolution have been definitely on the rise.
Yeah.
There was always a question as to how fast they would grow.
Mm-hmm.
Countries like Italy and Greece in Europe that began making mediation mandatory, where we could see real changes, Turkey as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then COVID comes along and really just puts a complete end to the idea that you cannot do your things online. And so if I was to say to you that the acceleration, as I predicted, which would otherwise have taken between 9 to 12 years to get to that place, has happened in the space of 3.5, 4 months. And so the future belongs to the young, dynamic, agile, resilient tech youth. And that doesn't include me. I'm an instrument of the process that will enable it for them to have it.
You're young at heart. I know that much at least.
Yeah. So if we think about it this way, we will be launching a new product in the fall, which will be called the Digital Dispute Resolution Specialist Certificate.
Right.
And this certificate is designed to work as a new brand, a new label for that young group that will need to navigate the complexities of algorithm, dispute resolution, video, mediation, and arbitration, and then the hybrid nature of all of those put together to serve the next 25, 30 years of development. So we're not looking 3 or 4 years down the road. We're
Right.
looking 2 to 3 generations down the road.
That's beautiful. Okay.
So that's the plan,
So,
right? I could think, till the end of 2025.
yeah.
And I think that would be very, very short-sighted of a leadership organization.
Yeah, fair enough. So obviously the future evolves as pretty much every new circumstance comes about. No one really thought what COVID, well, no one foresaw COVID that way. And then what happened, it's very difficult for a lot of the entrenched organizations to realize what to do during COVID.
Yeah.
But a lot of others, for example, our last webinar was with an organization called Navan Pharmaceuticals. So I don't want to say took advantage of it, but during it, they started setting up their diagnostics, their sanitation, and a lot of their new departments, which maybe were in the pipelines long before, but suddenly accelerated them because they realized that this is what the market needs right now. And because of that, maybe they've got the edge. And I can name a lot of other companies that have been talking to us, particularly with the online dispute resolution stuff, because in Pakistan, there as yet is no infrastructure to make online courts possible. So the only option they have is online mediation. Because even I believe they believe that even our online arbitration can't work, which is a very debatable process. But at least online mediation is very possible.
We've completed several online arbitrations since the beginning of the lockdown in the UK.
Yeah, yeah.
And they've worked extremely well, if not better. The cost has been minimal compared to the venue hire, the flights, the accommodation that would have gone into having them in London.
Oh, that's excellent.
I think we should put to bed the idea that we can't do it online.
See, it's just a matter of letting the idea slowly become entrenched in a lot of people's heads who have been maybe making an entire, investment on the offline part, and now online is that much difficult for them. But basically everyone else from the youth and the new generation, because they see the opportunity, they're using it in a very interesting couple of ways. So, as you know,
I would go further. I would say to you, those that don't buy it, or because the investment's been made in infrastructure, in the face-to-face, in-person method, just didn't understand the writing on the wall even 10 years ago.
Yeah, fair enough. That is given. Yeah. So Pakistan.
2001, we have the introduction of the Mark Prensky paper on digital native versus digital immigrant.
Right.
And if you were really a leader in the area and you were reading around what was going on, then you would have realized that this is happening. If you've been listening to people like Richard Susskind and Daniel Susskind talking about the future of work and the world of no work and the future of law and the future of medicine, then you will realize that actually you should be making these moves now. You should have anticipated COVID-19. Not that the fact that the pandemic was going to happen, but that the acceleration could come at any point. And what the pandemic has taught us is that seismic changes can take place now without need for years to happen. I was reading an article yesterday. I don't know if you've seen this, Akbar, but the last Blockbuster, the movie store where you can go and rent your movie, is in the US. The last one, okay? And they're gonna do a sleep-in where you can go watch films in the Blockbuster movie for memories.
For all the nostalgia, right?
They decided not to change despite the marketplace changing, and for being one of the most worthwhile companies in the world to being wiped out. That store doesn't mean anything anymore. So the music industry, the film industry, the food industry, the delivery industry, the shopping industry, the gaming industry, these are industries that show you that if you are not prepared to look at the change that is coming and prepare down the road, then that's what happens. And I think in the world of law, in the world of mediation, in the world of arbitration, this is happening. and which is
Oh,
why we are gonna push for this DDRS certificate. So it's
right.
a lawyer who is a mediator, who is an arbitrator, who is a negotiator, and who's also an online specialist. Because those are
Understood.
the tools in the toolbox that you're going to need for the next 2 to 3 generations. Now, we'll always reevaluate that, but that's going to
Hmm.
come. And if we don't look at that, if all the
Yeah.
organizations in this, in the sphere don't look at that, then there
Hmm.
will be bad losers, and there will be changes that come because they're going to be so seismic.
Yeah, and bad losers, unfortunately, seem to, at least in the start of the entire process, tend to make a mess of things. But usually, as you said, one of the most focal requirements of pretty much all of our efforts are a little bit of resiliency. Just wait it out, and you can generally make pretty much anyone realize that what you're offering, even if a lot of people don't understand it, who don't want to understand it, is still miles ahead from whatever they're offering.
Yeah.
So slowly, and in the past couple of our webinars as well, we've come to realize that it's not that people don't really understand what we're offering. It's more to the point where they didn't know the extent or to the scale of what we were doing with it. To them, there were lots of memories of this, maybe. For example, and we'll discuss this later on as well when you come to it. We met quite a few individuals who had been responsible for bring ADR in the 90s, for example, in Pakistan. And for reasons, it didn't work. And predominantly, what they asked us was, can you please help us identify why it didn't work before and why it's going to work now? And I haven't even gone into the research as yet to actually point it out, but one of the simplest answers I have to that entire question would be sometimes things are just not ready. Like a lot of things, including our trainings, including our capacity building, including the services, the centers, and everything else that maybe is a background to how AD as a platform can live, just wasn't there in the 90s, and they didn't know who to talk to. And also, let's say, the net wasn't there. The internet never gave you the amount of information that we now have.
Mm.
We conducted our course with you guys in July, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
did it online. Now, how in the world would anyone have been able to do that long ago? So
Yeah.
now the world has given you so many uh, points, so many assets, so many new methods of basically redoing anything as simple as training in a way that maybe the 90s people never really thought about.
What would be very interesting for you to do, Akbar, is to look
Hmm.
at the mean age of the delegates that did the training from Pakistan.
Yeah.
Because even though it's online and it's accessible,
Yeah.
what's happening is it's still not attracting those that see ADR as an
Hmm.
alarming drop in revenue.
Yeah.
Right?
They won't
So
conduct it.
I think you're right when you say that it's always a matter of timing and it's whether you're ready and all those factors. The ducks must
Hmm.
be in order, as it were. But
Yeah.
I also think there's more to it. And I think
Okay.
that even now, the people that will take on this new phenomenon are
Hmm.
not going to be that generation that was around in the 90s. They're not going to buy it. They're going to resist it.
Undoubtedly.
They're going to stop it for as long as they can. And my revolution, as I see it, is
Hmm.
for the young generation to love the products and the
Yep.
skills so much
Hmm.
that it outweighs any resistance.
That's usually how we've kind of also marketed the entire thing, right? So even with the course, even with the services, at the end of the day, sometimes you just have to give it to dreamers. You have to give it to the people who can dream beyond that and who haven't been restricted, unfortunately, by the entire process to just think this big. And
Sure.
you have to be in their minds long before they could be this big, so that at least you could give them a wider span,
Yeah.
right? And then you can leave it to the rest of the market to influence them however you want. But at least that's how we're working with. Now,
Sure.
do you mind if I talk to you about a few of the projects that we're working on and that we'd like your input on as well?
Sure.
So, as you know, we launched the ADR Initiative once we knew that we had you guys standing with us. So since then, we have conducted one course in UCL and one online, both firsts for Pakistan, and something we're very proud of. Now, ADRI is expanding into research and awareness, hence these webinars as well. So we're also providing a platform for the people you train to offer their mediation services. Now, one of the first projects that we launched, and this came out predominantly with the first webinar that we had with Zoe and Rahim Shamji, was that if we're offering ODR in Pakistan, so Pakistan itself doesn't have any of the infrastructure. So one of the first things that we could do, as we already did, was make a website. But then we also realized, because this is somewhat of a need in our culture and the way we work, we needed rules as to how ODR would function, or how any dispute resolution, whether mediation or arbitration, would function. So what we are doing is we have been working on the first model ODR rules for Pakistan. For anyone who wants to, let's say, incorporate ODR, whether they do it through the ADR initiative or on their own, we want to be able to give them the rules that allow them to actually do it right. So what we're doing is, at the current moment, we are at the drafting stage. So if we could have your input on those rules, then we could basically have it circulated and I suppose brought into a consultation stage from all stakeholders in Pakistan and abroad, who could then help us make these rules possible. So what do you think?
A great research project. It's difficult to answer the question in isolation.
Yeah.
Because there must be an overall strategy. Because ODR in itself, in my humble opinion, Pakistan is not ready.
Yeah, sure.
You need to be pronging it with very different aspects of it. But if we just stick to the question, which is ODR rules and model rules,
yeah,
I think that's quite an easy project in one way, which is go look at what the world has done in different parts.
Right.
But define what you mean by ODR.
So that's a very good question.
Online mediation with a video platform? Are you talking about online dispute resolution in an algorithm or an artificial intelligence way? Are you looking at bringing in, because that's what ODR really means. It means a digital platform to resolve disputes. If you mean online video mediation, that's a very separate set of rules to ODR rules. And I would ask you to look at the big players in the system, right?
Right.
So you've got Alibaba, you've got eBay, you've got Modria, Tyler Technologies, the big players out there who are looking at fast setups of volume dispute resolution.
Yeah.
I think Pakistan's ready for that kind of stuff. So
you're not wrong at all, because the few platforms that we have seen and that we are planning to work with could be something. So actually, Alibaba's already bought them. So there we have the Raz, for example, .pk, which is the largest online e-commerce platform we have. Then we have Zameen as well, which is the largest platform for buying or selling real estate in Pakistan. And real estate itself needs enormous amounts of dispute resolution issues.
Yeah, but so without going into specifics, what I'm trying to say to you is, in terms of the research project, you're trying to understand, first of all, the first thing is, what's the current landscape and opportunity for automated dispute resolution?
Okay.
Then once you have that, you need to then find a model that is fit for purpose for that cultural nexus.
Yeah.
And then third, is it going to be a fully automated service, or is it going to be like some of them, which is automated but then becomes hybrid at some point?
Right. I think as we didn't really dive into the automated part, because even working on that with the organizations that we have in mind, it's going to have to be, and this is my humble assumption about it, it's going to have to be to first show them that this is how ODR happens as far as just using a video link platform is concerned. See, this is how we can make it as simple as sitting on Skype, having it resolved. And then as we realize that this could also be automated, then we could move on to that process, because this is a simple education process for these organizations as well.
But if you look at the history of ODR, it was always the other way around. It was automated first, and video came second, right? So I'm just putting it out there to start thinking. Well, because you can get volume through the door, it's easier with the technology available to do that.
Right.
So when you complain to a large e-commerce website that you don't like the product, or there's an issue with the buyer-seller,
Right.
even though you actually think that you're chatting with a human being on a chat function, or whatever, it's all bots behind.
Right. Yeah.
They're looking at the words you use. They're looking at the exclamation marks, all sorts of symbols.
Fair enough.
And now Alibaba is looking, and I hear this the other day, is that the video, you're talking to a person, you think, but the video is looking at your creases in your forehead, the way your ears are moving, to suggest whether you understand the answer, if you're angry, less angry, and they can tell you that your feelings are going one way or the other, and the accuracy is incredible. So I want you to start thinking about a much wider piece of research, if you're going to do it, which could not only influence Pakistan's dispute resolution landscape, but could probably feed into a much wider debate and policy on that region and the wider region.
That's beautiful. We really should. I had not thought about it at all. I love it. We're going to come back to this soon as well. Now, just my mind's just started racing about it, but we have other things to focus on as well. So let's say the next project, beyond the ODR stuff, is one in which we have to study the implementation of an out-of-court settlement. Now, why this came up is because in one of our webinars with the Royal Fans, he insisted, the director of Royal Fans, that implementation should be our forte. Because to him and to a lot of other people who, let's say, are very new to this concept of whatever we're offering to them as service, their question revolves around, or finally comes down to it, is we have a settlement now. How are you going to have it enforced? Now, I could tell them that the settlement may be of a nature that wouldn't need enforcing, because it will be, in a certain sense, very well crafted by the mediator, so that both parties willingly want to implement it. But they constantly have this question of enforcement and implementation. And let's say some senior judges have also been asking me that this is a process, this is a question that you need to float, because this is maybe an answer that ADR, at least in Pakistan, needs, and maybe the world needs as well. So you need to start asking questions about how implementation happens everywhere on the planet. So could you give us some ideas about it?
Can I just clarify that the word implementation is enforcement? Yeah, it's come up with a question. Yeah. Again, you need to look at this in a much wider scope.
Right.
There are two issues that I see when you come to any kind of enforcement of an agreement, be it through mediation, through negotiation, people coming together just to do business together.
Right.
And Pakistan, by its nature, as a country that is young, diverse, but has a strong sense of ethic and religion permeating through it.
Yeah.
I think you need to also look at the idea of a moral enforcement and the legal enforcement.
Yep.
And I think if you divide it into those two categories, it starts to change everything.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think we focus on too much in the idea of enforcement is, once we agree, how do we then make sure it doesn't go wrong? I want to start thinking about, before we get into the agreement and we even go to the table, enforcement is laid out very clearly as to what we will do when we settle. See,
interesting.
We keep thinking of settlement as the bit that ends the formal process of a mediation, for example.
Fair enough.
And then let's see what happens.
Yeah.
We need to reverse and saying settlement is one aspect of the entire process, and mediation therefore includes enforcement. Why do we suddenly stop at session 5 when we settle? Why don't we think about the next bits? So there must be a holistic understanding, and this is the ADR initiative can be the game changer in Pakistan, because you're saying you're going to come through us through a journey. The journey starts when you instruct us, but doesn't end when we end the process. It ends at some form of formal enforcement if needed. We don't walk away.
Yeah.
You hold the hands of the parties, you hold the hands of the lawyers, you make sure
Mm-hmm.
everybody is bought in. So even your agreement to mediate talks about enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Okay.
If you don't separate the two, then there's no question as to what happens. The enforcement question is not a question anymore. You kill it.
I like it. So, in fact, in a similar way, when we were discussing this issue with the client as well, he gave us some ideas which range through. So, you call it moral enforcement, for example. He also added something called social enforcement,
Yeah.
in the sense that if there is a settlement, you use it to have the other person realize that this is what you stood for, and now you backed out from it. And to him, at least as far as a structure that he wanted was concerned, was there should be consequences. They don't have to be legal consequences, but it should be something that we can raise for any party to say that this is how this person sort of breached the settlement that he had, and that could be in a platform. For example, for them, it was something as simple as an association in their industry. So they
Yeah.
could sort it over there.
Yeah. I think that is a very good way of thinking about it. But I think I mentioned this in my training when you did the training many years ago too.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the most popular mediation providers and mediators
Mm-hmm.
religious leaders and religious organizations.
Okay.
And the reason that they're very popular is that parties will go to them because they start on a very high level of trust and openness.
Yep.
And if that's the case, then the morality of a settlement agreement is bound by something higher than even a legal principle.
Yep.
You have offended me in the eyes of God rather than the eyes of the law. It's something so powerful, and both are connected to it.
Yeah.
Right? Now,
Yeah.
we don't want to take. I'm not advocating taking a mediation into a religious sphere for the sake of it. But I'm saying that there are opportunities of a greater good, of a greater understanding, of a common heritage, of a common state or a common nationality, a common something that starts to change things. Now, the ultimate large entity that I want to focus on in my work is one humanity.
Yeah.
So that when you decide to do a deal, because we talk about Ubuntu in our training.
Yeah. Yes.
For me, that's critical. Right?
I know.
For me, that starts to change the idea of how we are trying to understand this. Yeah. So I would like you to start thinking in the enforcement idea of a much wider scope, and enforcement not being a separate dynamic in the settlement process. It is part and parcel of mediation. Right? And the successful countries where they've done that, so for example, if you look at Canada, in Ontario and in British Columbia, they have a registration of settlement agreements that can happen in a week. So that means that when you settle in the actual mediation, it's not over because there's still another step to go, which gives both parties this sense of it won't go wrong, because if it does, I've got something else to morally and legally pull you back on. And I think that when you're thinking for a place like Pakistan, you have a really wide opportunity to think how this could happen. And don't limit yourselves to the idea of civil commercial settlement either. You're talking about much wider understanding of that.
That's kind of how we're also sort of tackling some of the next issues that we have, which may expand to political, may expand to family, may expand to a lot of other ways that we're interested in providing our mediation services. And with each of them, possibly, we also have to work out with them their own individual implementation or enforcement mechanism, if any. And if they don't have it, then that's kind of interesting to us, because then we would love to develop it with them. And that feeds back into the entire project that we're trying to make of how. So one client told me an implementation mechanism that he thought about, another could give me another. So if we could have a roundtable of a lot of people who are also implementing a lot of things a lot of ways, because they are at the end of the day running a business. So they have figured out a way, let's say, of how to erase bad debt, how to erase a lot of issues that come about in the industry. So that roundtable is something we're very interested in creating and then working with to actually be able to offer each of our clients the number of options that we can give them as far as this issue is concerned, right? Wonderful. We'd love to figure this out with you guys too. So the next question, in fact, is less of a question, more of a announcement because we just recently got through it. So we have something very exciting to talk about: legislative and policy change in Pakistan. Basically, we were invited by PMLN after we had a very successful webinar with the Deputy Secretary General to give them a presentation on in their offices about what ADR is, how it works, what is this training that you guys provide, what is the services that you guys are doing, what are you up to? So we did that with them. And mashallah, we're very excited to say that they were very receptive and appreciative, and they were very encouraging, and they were very positive about working with us as well. So they wanted to work on us with, let's say, not just the legislative changes that they think are necessary. Now, I might constantly say that ADR does not need law behind it, in the sense that it can work beyond any legislative requirement. But let's say to them, and this is where the 1990s part comes in. So according to PMLN, they had tried, or their party president at that time, Mr. Nawaz Sharif, had tried to bring ADR into Pakistan in some manner or form. And at that time, at least the limited discussion we had on that at that point was concerned, it did not work out. Now, we're very interested in figuring out A, what they tried to do, and B, how it didn't work out. And because they want from us a working paper of sorts of how to make sure that the past is learned from and the future is prepared in that same direction. And I'm sure for your very interesting purposes, what we also were able to clarify to them, they really appreciated the fact that we train people and that our course is probably one of the best in the world, because that's kind of what we told them. So what we also told them was, and this is where we come about as far as the party structure is concerned, and from it, I want to create a platform or an example for others as well. We told them that your disputes are very party-centric in between the parties, which you do not want out of the party because that is a cause of a lot of issues for you guys as well. So what we want to create for you is a dispute resolution system. First, we train you guys, your party members, your committee members, however you like, and then give you the mechanism by which all of this happens in-house. So what I need to understand from you, if you have experience with this, training politicians in political mediation, is that a thing? And if that's a thing, how does one do it?
First of all, congratulations on getting a positive response on them. I think the way to think about it, again, these are views at the top of my head, responding and reacting to what you're saying, and of course, I can give this more thought. The first thing to start to differentiate is the different strands of dispute and conflict management that can come up in a political party, in a political establishment, in a legislative process. These are multi-layered questions. So we just take one for now of a political party looking at its own conflicts internally. I would think of it in two ways. The first is, do the officers at key touch points within the system have good conflict management training? Because if they do, they can actually prevent the conflict from escalating. And there are proper procedures in place to allow that to happen. And that training is correlated with the process as identified. Two, if the conflict becomes too big to handle internally, there should be a private, dedicated, independent provider where they go and get resolved. And that could be ADRI. Thirdly, in the legislative sense, that's a much wider challenge. And one of the things that I think doesn't happen well, and is a very, very important principle, particularly in Islam, and a country like Pakistan should embrace this, is the idea of consultation to the people it's going to affect the most. And so I would look at the consultative process of understanding what are the fears if these laws change, and how can we prepare you to embrace this? That's number one. Number two, look at some of the governments around the world and the kinds of changes they've made. So the first one, I think it was around 2010, 2011, 2012. The British government has a pledge on ADR. What that means, doesn't matter who the government is, that any disputes the government has with private sector, be it on procurement, on services, or otherwise, must go through mediation or ADR. Right? So what you're doing as a government is you're saying, this is not about whether you challenge us for being corrupt or wrong or not paying. This is about a disagreement, and we will go to a third party before we go to the courts to see if we can resolve this in both parties' best interests. And if you look at some of the principles of confidentiality and other things that have come out from the UK, DEFRA, the Department of Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs, in a mediation with pharmacists, that was one of the big cases, tells you that the government agency is involved in mediation. And so if you really want to make legislative changes, you have to show that the highest levels of government is ready to engage in a process that they trust. Then comes the credibility of those mediators. There's got to be a high quality, highly experienced group of people who can undertake those kinds of cases, because they have to have the trust of all the parties of their credibility. And then thirdly, when you've done an understanding of what the other governments around the world have done, you then need to look at, do these models in their own right, if we plant them in Pakistan, work in the cultural nexus that we have, or do we need to adapt them? Because one of the problems for too long has been adopting cultures that are not fit for your own culture. Just because a country, just in case an English-speaking country does something, does not mean it's going to work in other parts of the world. And so this is a great model, lots to think about. And I think you need to think about it from a design ADR architectural process.
Absolutely. So, what's interesting? So you mentioned that the British have a pledge. And what I've also noticed is, and I don't think this is a conscious decision, predominantly all the mediations and arbitrations that I have seen or that I've been part of are because the other party, one of the party is government, and they have insisted on a dispute resolution clause. So their dispute resolution clause has brought the private party to ADR, who have then later asked further questions about how, why, what is this dispute resolution clause, if they never thought about it before. Because let me be honest about this, a lot of, for example, these engineering contracts, right? Sometimes when they come up, the government can enforce whatever DR clause they want. At the end of the day, the client is just happy to get the business. But it's when they face an issue with the DR clause that they then realize that this is a thing. And then they get educated in the entire thing. So subconsciously, maybe, the government of Pakistan has been doing something in this sort.
Yes, but I would go a step further than the next thing. If you're looking at ADR changes in government and legislation, is let's think about the education of tomorrow's lawyers who will become those decision makers, and understanding what it means for good ADR legislation to come through, because then the awareness and the buy-in is happening at a whole generation across the piece. So that a lot of the bar students that in Pakistan that come from the UK have all undertaken our mediation courses, arbitration courses, etc., etc., etc. It changes the dynamic completely.
So what just came into my mind, for example, from what you just mentioned, I remember while we were in that meeting with the MLN, there was a guy who was a former, I believe, education minister. And he was very interested in bringing some sort of, uh, I wouldn't say curriculum, but some sort of addition into whatever we're doing as far as the students are concerned, or in some way, because that was where his interest lay. But once you move above that, let's say from the students to, let's say, the services part, and what you just mentioned about having qualified individuals, what I have seen for the longest time in Pakistan is a lack of recognition or enforcement about someone who is a mediator, who claims that they're a mediator, and why they can do so and they can't do so. So the last act that came about, and for whatever reason, there isn't a there isn't a shortage of acts sometimes that come about, but they're just very deficient in their basic norm. And generally, it feels like maybe the people who have promoted them had whatever interest they had to make it happen. So there was a conversation, and I was very happy about it. That was written over there that there would be an accreditation council formed, which will accredit whoever a mediator is. Now, that was it. Beyond that, there was no conversation about what this council will be, how they will judge these mediators. Will they acknowledge mediation or training done from beyond Pakistan, within Pakistan? Is there even any training required? So, in the rules that came about later on, here is what was written, and here is where I get particularly sad. The requirement was, let's say, a 10-year tenure as an advocate in the High Court, for example. And beyond that, it could be a doctor, you could be architect, you could be an engineer, you could be a lot of these things. And they just basically named the professions that one could be. They did not mention what those professions should have or should have any training in them to actually make them seem like they're ADR practitioners. So that made me sad in the sense that you could have just put that in. But for whatever reason, and the reasons could be varied from political to any other, they did not. And that is why that particular act may not survive very long. But still, because of the fact that now we may be in a position to offer further legislation, we can suggest different ways or different means of how you can recognize mediators in Pakistan, whether through foreign accreditation or whether if domestic accreditation is required, then that will inevitably need an understanding of how foreign accreditation happens anyway. So I'm sure that we have a lot to offer in what we can actually provide to them, the government, and to the entire sector. This is how it's been happening wherever it's been happening, from Singapore to the UK to Greece. And this is how, if you do want to culturally make it relevant and domesticate the entire process, this is how at least we should think about. So that could really lead to some interesting doors opening in Pakistan, because at the end of the day, and this was another conversation, uh, there was some center, and unfortunately, for better for worse, it was populated by a lot of people who call themselves dispute resolution experts. And because they were not experts, or because they had not been trained, that the entire service that they provided was so deficient in any positive outcome. At the end of the day, the entire label of dispute resolution of ADR sunk with them, and that has been a cycle that's been going on. So capacity building, in my head, is basic, essential, first requirement, and I'm very happy that the people sitting over there, the legislators, the policy changers, were very apt on that part as well. If we don't have capacity, if we don't have actual certifications of some sort, this won't really move forward beyond just words. So we've got a good process going over there, and I'm very happy about that. And obviously, you and I are going to go into a lot of details about it in due time as these meetings move forward, right?
Sure.
So if I could move forward to the next question that we had a first corporate client, which we had a webinar with the other day called Navan Labs, who want us to be all in with them. So they want us to work with them on numerous issues that they've been having and develop a dispute management strategy with them, which incorporates the entire spectrum of dispute management so they can strategically use ADR to accomplish their ends as a company. The reason I enjoyed talking to Essen, who was the CEO, was he was very he was very, he just talked business. And if he just talked business, I could just give him business answers. They were less about, let's say, the dreams or the potentials of it all. He was like, are you going to save me money or not? How are you going to save me money? I've got these laws, I've got this. What are you going to do with all of that? So it was a beautiful conversation that led us to a very clear understanding of this is where we can come in. If you have a traditional system, this is what you can use traditional system for. And then you can ask us to step in when the traditional system is unable, because that's adversarial, is unable to come to conciliation. So the thing is, I want to give them a system, but I also want to train them and show that the ADR, along with traditional process, can work together. And I really need your help with this one, because I need to show them that the corporate part of it all and ADR being part of your corporate toolkit can really work.
What's the question?
How do we make them realize that part?
I think there's a very easy business case
Mm-hmm.
for this, and it's twofold. Mm-hmm. And it depends on the company and which one comes first for them. One is always going to be a cost driver, but it can be cost. It could be second, but it's normally one of the top two. But the other one they don't realize is important in NGOs, international NGOs, and the corporate world. And this is the game changer. Is, are you in control of dispute resolution?
Yeah.
And they're not. Because what happens is, no matter how many good lawyers and good people you have, the beast becomes so big at some point because you haven't taken charge of it from its birthplace, its infancy, that it goes on its own road, and you are at the mercy of a third party, or even worse, more than one third parties, multiple third parties. And then, as you lose control, the only thing you know what to do is to throw more money at it even more, just to keep hoping you'll pull it back or you'll stop it from becoming even bigger. So I'm very happy to sit with you and to understand the organization and to look, because I've done this before with many, is what are the structures now? How can I help them retain control?
Mm-hmm.
How can then I therefore also minimize costs? And you only have to look at some of the big companies around the world. You know, BP is one of the classic ones. The Gulf of Mexico oil spill. Something in the region of 2 million claims in the first 24 hours when it opened the claims line. They used ADR extremely efficiently. And the result for BP was not only did they save money, but they managed to keep control over the dispute resolution process. There wasn't a doubt they were going to pay. There wasn't a doubt that they were going to pay a lot of money. The question was, could you keep control, or would you be at the mercy of something or someone else? And I think so with your friend Ehsan or other corporates, this is a very important element to think about.
That's beautiful. And considering how much I know about him, he would really be sold on the control part. That's part of and parcel of what you need as a CEO. I love it. So what we'll do is I'll figure out the next steps with him, and then as they develop, I'll invite you into the entire conversation, and then we'll help them see how ADR can work with their organization, and through it, that's a model for pretty much easily pitching it to any other organization as well. So we're coming to one of the last things, and this is, let's say, the second last part, but which is something I'm very excited about, because this is something that's very overlooked. And it's the other end of the spectrum. So you've got the big corporates, right? But no one is working or thinking about the startups. No one's working thinking about all the little kids who've set up their little entrepreneurial bakeries, workshops, wedding gown shops. I remember there was so many things going on during COVID. So our entire service now, and this is a pilot project that we're starting with one of the first food delivery companies that has opened up, who has mashallah been making a lot of waves and he's very successful, is what is his dispute resolution process? Because it's food and he has a lot of them. And predominantly, what we came down to was if we want to offer him a process, how do we make it A, simple enough, maybe cheap enough as well? And let's say if we take different models from all over the world, how can we make it a process by which if he, as a relatively small startup, can benefit from ADR, then there's an entire marketplace open. For a lot of other, I don't want to call them kids, but generally anyone who starts at a very small level, they don't have the resources. So ADR's promise was that this would be very low cost. And I only can see or understand how ODR fits into it all. So basically, one of our questions with him was, let's say if he has a process. So we were talking a lot about WhatsApp dispute resolution, about how you could have disputes shared over WhatsApp and figure out how they work. And you're shaking your head, and now I'm going to hear why you're shaking your head.
The idea of looking at the startup market is critical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of good, for example, law firms around the world that specialize in startup advice.
Mm-hmm.
But what the startups need is when things go wrong, whether it's with suppliers, whether it's with consumers, is, I think Zoe went through this with you. I think she did because I was on the webinar, talking about the European platform for consumer dispute resolution. And that doesn't really it doesn't prevent anyone who's not a startup. It can be anyone that can go onto this platform, but the platform is very agile to say disputes of a certain nature come through here. There's a way in which they're received and processed. It therefore re-encourages negotiation, and if negotiation can't work, then you come back to a form of online mediation, arbitration, or adjudication. And so for startups, in order for them to be efficient with the seed money they have, is to have a very, very low, high impact, efficient way of resolving disputes. And I think that you have the opportunity of building a very exciting platform for low value, high turnover disputes, which is why I go back to the earlier question. Are you looking at pure ODR when you're looking at models for rules, or are you looking at the model of ADR, video mediation or otherwise? But if you can go for a pure model platform, I think you change everything.
Mm-hmm. So from that, I can understand that it is undoubtedly a requirement now that we will have to figure out how to make it a much more pure platform, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a conversation you should have with clients, but you need to build something. I mean, there are lots of off-the-shelf platforms too, but I think there's something very easy that you can create in a very short space of time, would address the whole. And you know, Pakistan has got a great startup market, and you look at your mean age in Pakistan. The young is by far the biggest population, and they have ideas. And their ideas need creativity, but what their ideas don't need is cost and delay. And so you start to bridge that cost and delay point, and you start working with banks who are funding, funders who are funding, because then it becomes part of the narrative to do this regardless.
So yeah, predominantly one of the other avenues I saw for the startup part was I was directly approaching the client who would use it, and B would be if, let's say, there are some incubators, accelerators, some funders, I would first create a DR platform with them that they could then offer as part of the support services to the startups as well. So this is exciting for me. I have very little information on it, so we're basically just doing everything. Well, literally, our teams are just talking to the startup and be like back and forth. Okay, is this what's happening? Is this what's happening? Is this how we can solve something? So there's a lot of research element going on that we're enjoying a lot because we're learning a lot from this. because we're not trying to presume that this has already happened. That's a dangerous part that we, at least in Pakistan, where culturally a lot of things can be absorbed from, let's say, Western countries. But maybe it doesn't really work in the very micro sense, because in the very micro sense, sometimes I feel we're very different. As much as we all speak English, we also all have a very different way of approaching a lot of cultural, religious things. So that's been very interesting. And I think we really need to work with you on this, on the pure ODR part, which was very alien to me before this. And I really need to figure out if that's an achievable goal. And if we can offer that as a service, then that really basically makes the startup part very easy for us. So it's very exciting to work on that with you. Now, the final thing that we're doing, and this is from my heart, and I know you've been working on it as well, is peace building. And peace building is something that for most people, it may seem less concrete, but you might know we're working on research with mental health, with culture, and more excitingly, with arts, with music, and how that can impact whatever dispute resolution or conflict management, or the larger space of peace building that we can offer here. So last one is I want to personally take forward to show everyone that peace building is universal. We can speak the language in whatever medium the people are comfortable with. So one of our ideas with this is we'll proceed with webinars, because that is what COVID allows us to do. But then slowly we'll take events more offline. We'll do, let's say, maybe concerts, we'll do shows, we'll do comedy gigs, we'll do, let's say, education stuff, animation, and so on. So first up, this is something that we've been working on for too long. You and I need to jam together. And from that jam, we are going to start building up the brand of peace building, or peace building, at least in Pakistan, as much as we can. And then allow that to permeate through the masses, particularly the youth, because we're both very clear on that part. It's the youth who are going to take this forward. And it's the youth who can actually internally embrace it. Maybe a lot of us in our generation and the older generation, we've had our own assumptions about whether peace is a thing or not a thing, but the youth are still ready to learn about it. So I remember you mentioned something about maybe poetry and everything that ADR-ODR International was up to. So if we can explore what other options we have and then basically figure out a way to take the narrative forward, I would love to understand what could be possible.
I think, look, great ideas and very innovative. And I think there's a problem with the word peace building.
Okay.
It seems like a long and heavy and untenable project. The reality is you need to break it down. You need to start thinking about what are the core components of building a peaceful society. So I want to tell you two stories that I think if anyone that's listening may find very interesting. In 2012, I was in New York at the UN doing some training on mediation. And at that time, the Friends of Mediation project at the UN was being headed by Finland and Turkey. And the Finnish resident rep asked me to attend a meeting with one of the ministers that was flying into the country the next day. And the meeting took place at the crack of dawn. It was very hush-hush. It was a quick meeting. When I went to the meeting, the minister said to me, "I'd like you to look at this document." And they rolled out this piece of paper. And the piece of paper showed a human being being born on the left at age 0 and on the right at age 100. And on this line between 0 and 100 were all the possible times that this individual may experience a conflict from the moment they're born to the moment they may die at the age of 100. Right? All, and macro and micro examples along. I looked at this and I said to the Finnish minister, I said, "What is this?" And she said to me, "This is the National Action Plan on Mediation for the Finnish government." And what we're trying to do is understand, where can we build a concept of peaceful dialogue or interventions so that our citizens do not end up going through life in conflict more than they need to. Now, that's a very holistic plan. But then they broke it down by zones. So 0 to 5 was going to be the responsibility of early childhood education, those people implementing, and parents. 5 to 10 was going to move into the school sector with the surrounding youth camps and scout movements and others taking a role in this. And what you're doing with peace building is you're trying to identify in any particular area, what can you achieve? You can't do everything. And you have to give stakeholders the responsibility of doing things. You have to create awareness. And more importantly, everything has to be underpinned by this notion that I'm a big firm believer on, is the idea of pluralism. And the plurality of people, the plurality of thinking, ethnicity, traditions, etc., that bring us together, that are the very problems that often cause the conflicts that we're experiencing rather than anything else. So if you address pluralism, then you address the idea of listening and not talking. Your peace building activities can become very manageable, targeted, and hopefully have longevity within them.
That's a fantastic way to think about it.
And you can Google the National Action Plan on mediation. It exists. It's out there.
I will. And predominantly what we've slowly come to realize is usually it's beautiful in the way that before, whenever someone used to think ADR, let's say generations way before us, my father or his father, and even with, let's say, some people a lot older or little older, such as the PMLN people, and they don't realize, and maybe it's because, again, we didn't have the infrastructure to realize what or where the world is as far as dispute resolution or peace building is concerned. So they just tried on their own, couldn't make it work. They stopped. They just didn't have it available to them. And I love the fact that now we're slowly coming to a planet where a lot of these things have been building up. So we have templates to bring out.
But also remember that at certain points in time, those generations had other bigger things to worry about. So in order for you to create a peace building narrative, you need space and time to reflect and think on where society is. Because if you're worried about, the basics of life and security of life, then these things are not necessarily things that you can have time to think about. Which is why the importance of universities and academics and people like us in the non-confrontational roles can have time to think and create and then advise people.
That's wonderful. So speaking of university and academics, so basically the last thing I in fact wanted to share with you was, so ADR Initiative is going to start building centers in UCL, in PCL. You're familiar with both, but also with a few other organizations, and not just universities, maybe law firms as well, maybe accountancy firm, maybe a lot of people. And the idea was, and the idea still continues to be, we are trying to spread it as much as we can and offer whatever we have available to as many people as we can without feeling any sort of, let's say, competitive disadvantage from them in any way, right? So one of the models that we're working on is, how does the partner program work in that sense? So with a lot of the centers, especially in the universities, we're going to start with our research think tanks and then our training, so on. And we're going to figure out a way to bring the training and education as part of the universities. And then with the firms, with other service providers, maybe with other training institutions, we're going to slowly have it available to them that this is what we have. Use it. If you want us to develop more, work with us, we'll develop it. It's because obviously at the end of the day, we again saw what a lot of people did with ADR before us. And we saw that there was an attempt at hoarding, for lack of a better word. And we are trying to figure out what is the best way to work around it, because that is as we've seen, a very fatal way to start a project and to just have it finished way beforehand. So it's been part of our journey. And if you have any insight or advice on that, we'd be very interested in hearing it, because this is something that's been racking our brains for a while.
Let's talk about it again.
So what we're going to do now is just have one of the questions that we've gotten from the audience. I'll share with you. And that is, right, thank you. How effectively has fully automated ODR been? Sorry, how effective has fully automated ODR been? How does it work per se, and how can people be made comfortable with an automated DR process?
I mean, it's extremely successful, and it deals with the need of the day rather than the feelings. But if you deal with the need and the feelings, work really well. Some of the big companies, the eBays, the Amazons, they're doing it all the time. Modria is now looking at automated divorce platforms. So you go online, you fill everything in, you come up with a divorce after a certain period. It's not like a 1 hour application, but what happens is that it takes you through these structures, and you feel you're talking to people, but actually you're talking to bots. But there's no feeling it's a bot. It becomes a very pragmatic and comfortable process. Now, not everyone's going to like it, but if you look at the users of these programs, it's very interesting. The Dutch and Western Canada were some of the trial areas, or took on this model before. What I think we need to realize is horses for courses. Some things are going to work and stick, and some may not. I'm not a big fan of ODR for everything in the pure form of dispute resolution like that, but I think it has a great place for efficiency, and it allows people to get things done.
Brilliant. So just in addition to what you just said, in fact, so Pakistan, in law, in fact, requires that even if there is a, let's say, a divorce notice that is usually sent to a union council over here, it needs mediation after that. In the period between which they actually issue the divorce certificate, which is 90 days, the chairman of the union council is supposed to, well, they call it an arbitration council then. He's required to sit with the parties and try to mediate in between them. Now, it's strange that nowhere in the actual law has it been written that they need to mediate. It's been written that he needs to sit with them and see if he can resolve something, but it's still called arbitration. And second thing that we discussed, in fact, with PMLN as well, was there is no training for such individuals. They have no interest, they have no idea how to do it. So there have been gaps that we've identified quite vividly, that these are places where it needs to happen. And frankly, it's been a very lovely progress as far as having people realize and then having people on board who want to then bring the change in all of this that happens. That said, Rahim, thank you so much for being with us today and for always standing on our side. We owe all this to your support, and inshallah, we will accomplish our dreams of bringing peace into our souls and then others as well.
Thank you very much, Akbar. Thank you to everybody at the ADRI.
Our pleasure. See you soon.